Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
I am very pleased that Mike Nellis is here. He was a senior advisor to Kamala Harris in the before times. Now he is the founder and CEO of Authentic, a Chicago-based political fundraising and consulting firm. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, too. I'm going to surprise you by not talking about Kamala Harris at the start of this discussion.
Okay.
Rather, there's been a lot of talk about something that might be a little bit in the weeds politically for a lot of people, but that's who is going to be the next head of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the part of the Democratic Party that raises funds, and some would argue it has the power to, in many ways, sort of set the tone or set the agenda. I've been reading about all different kinds of high-profile people who have been weighing in. You know, David Axelrod famously is saying, well, that would be a great job for Rahm Emanuel because he's a great fundraiser. Robert Reich, the economist, has come out and said, no, Rahm would be the worst choice. We've got to get past this whole, we want the DNC to be more than just let's all reach out to really rich people and have them write checks. That we want the DNC to be reflective of the fact that maybe, just maybe, a more sort of blue-collar outreach would be a smarter move. Some people are talking about Ken Martin from Minnesota, who did a lot of good things with the Democratic Party there. Talk to me about, Robert Reich argued that the person who heads the DNC, while certainly fundraising is, the main job description there, that he thinks the head of the DNC should also try to sort of change the narrative about the Democratic Party, that it once was the party of the working class and that it should try to become that again. First of all, what do you think about the job? Should it just be limited to let's just pick the person who we know is great at raising money?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is that the Democratic Party is the party of the working class. We just didn't do a good enough job of winning over working class voters in the last election, but we're the only political party that I would argue is actually fighting for working class people all across the country. The DNC chair race is going to be an interesting one. It's going to be the kind of thing where it'll get outsized media coverage relative to its importance. It's important, but it's going to be the kind of, I think, proxy battle for the future of the Democratic Party, and there's going to be a lot of different factions that are going to be trying to push their agenda here. The way I'm thinking about this is, and I don't have a candidate that I'm backing or not backing right now. I'm sort of going to wait and see how the field develops and see who puts together a vision before I decide if I'm going to support anybody. But I view it as the DNC chair has to do a couple things, and they sort of conflict with each other in terms of the skill set that people typically have. But the DNC chair is the chief spokesman for the party, chief spokesperson for the party in a time when we're the minority. So there's a necessary component of being able to go on TV, articulate a vision, talk about the future of the party, talk about the work that we're going to do, be able to movement build and create that. The second piece of it is fundraising. Fundraising is incredibly important. The DNC as an entity exists essentially, in my view, to elect a Democratic president and then to support state and local parties all across the country. So its ability to raise money and distribute that money and invest it in building strong state parties is incredibly important. And then the third aspect of it is to set the tone for the kind of campaigns that we're running and the organization and infrastructure that we're building. So I'm looking for somebody who can reasonably do all three. And it's a hard thing to ask one person to do. There have been times in the past where we haven't had one chair, but we've had like co-chairs. I think around 2004, they had co-chairs, and one co-chair was responsible for fundraising and chief spokesman. I believe it was Marty Walsh, and then I couldn't tell you who the other co-chair was. I apologize to whoever that person is if they're listening. But then the other person was responsible for party building. And there are three really important buckets, and like Rahm would be incredible at fundraising, no doubt about that. I don't know that he's exactly who I would put forward at this moment from like a chief spokesman role, and maybe there's a way to message around that, because as much as I like Rahm represents the past, right? Like Rahm was part of the Obama administration. Rahm was the mayor of Chicago. There are fresher faces out there. I've known Ken Martin for a while. I think he's an amazing party builder. I
don't know much about him until his name surfaced in multiple articles for this job. Tell me what you know about Ken Martin.
Yeah, so Ken is the head of the DFL, which is the Democratic Party in Minnesota. He's a Paul Wellstone guy. I'm also a Paul Wellstone guy. I got my start in Democratic politics because I read Paul Wellstone's book, A Conscience of a Liberal. And for those that might not remember, Paul Wellstone was a senator from Minnesota, and he died in a plane crash, but he was sort of the voice of, I would argue, the working class part of the Democratic Party, maybe filling the role that people today would see from a Bernie Sanders or a Sherrod Brown. And he was really an extraordinary leader who was very, very good at articulating what the Democratic Party should stand for at its best and what politics should stand for at its best. And I was just on vacation this weekend with my family, and my parents had their 40th wedding anniversary, and they rented a house in Florida, flew out there, and the book I brought was Conscience of a Liberal by Paul Wellstone, because I was deciding I was going back to basics. And within the very first couple of sentences, I was already like feeling the reasons that I had joined the Democratic Party. And he was talking about how all politics is personal, and that, no one should ever be questioning what the Democratic Party is doing to help working people. And I think Ken is very built in that mold. And before he took over, and I'm not endorsing anybody. I think Ken's great. I also think Ben Wickler, who's the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, would be really great. And there's lots of other people. But Ken helped rebuild the Minnesota Democratic Party. Has helped elect a ton of Democrats in Minnesota, build a really strong party. It's the last state that's standing in the quote-unquote blue wall for the Democratic Party right now. And so I just think he's someone that, at that intersection, I could see him being a very effective chief spokesman. I could see him being a very effective movement builder and fundraiser, and I know he knows how to win elections. And so that's why he's an interesting candidate to me.
When you say that he helped rebuild the Democratic Party in Minnesota, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that my understanding of it is, and again, I'm not from Minnesota. I did marry a woman from Minnesota, so she might actually be able to tell you more than I can. But I think before he took over, like, the state Democratic Party was in debt. I think they had struggled electorally. I think they had struggled to win statewide, and they've won a series of statewide elections now that I think has just put them in a really strong, solid position. And Ken is also the chair of ASTC, which is an organization that organizes all the state parties together. And so I've interacted with him at several of those meetings over time, because I work with a lot of state party organizations. And I've just always found him to be a really impressive guy that is very serious about winning and is not going to get caught up in the BS. Like, I tell people all the time, a lot of my clients and a lot of people who work for me, like 90% of the things that we talk about on Twitter don't matter to regular voters and are not things that people talk about. And the phrase is Twitter is not real life. I actually have a T-shirt. And if I was ever going to get a tattoo, I might actually have to have that tattooed on my arm. But he does a good job in my mind of like clarifying, like, how are we winning people over? How are we centering everything on people? And I think to a certain degree, the Democratic Party has gotten away from that. And if we want to win people back, we need to center everything in like how we're helping everyday people, because look at the exit polls from what happened 3 weeks ago. We won people who were making over $100,000. We lost narrowly with people making $50 to $100, and then we got creamed by people who are making less than $50,000. And I'm sorry, but Donald Trump is not going to do a single thing to help people who are making less than $50,000. But people are frustrated at us because inflation's been high over the last several years, and we didn't do enough to make them feel like we were going to do something about it. We didn't do enough to help alleviate the burden that they were feeling in their day-to-day lives. And we spent a lot of time talking about issues that are super important. And I don't want to like diminish any of these issues, but if they're not directly impacting your life in the same way that, going to the grocery store and filling up your gas tank is, it's a luxury for you to be able to vote for anything else other than your economic necessity. And so we need to get back to basics. I think Ken does a good job of articulating that. I think there'll be other candidates like Ben Wickler who can do that too.
You said that 90% of what we talk about on social media doesn't matter to the average voter. You also talked about inflation. I heard somebody say, or read somebody saying, that it maybe would have helped if you'd have had somebody like a Bill Clinton in the White House, Bill Clinton, who touted all of his successes and gains early and often, that Bill Clinton would be the first person to tell you about the great things that he had just done. And that really wasn't until he got into campaign mode for, what was going to be his second term. It didn't seem like Biden did a lot of that. It did a lot of that tooting of his own horn. Because, as you just said, the people who voted for Donald Trump is not going to help those people. And yet, they seem to come away with this idea somehow that their lives would be better under Donald Trump. Isn't that a messaging problem?
Some of it's a messaging problem. Some of it's also just a reality of what it's like to live or exist in this world problem. And I tell a lot of my clients this all the time, but put yourself in the shoes of what based on demographic and psychoanalytic data I have of what a median voter probably looks like, what an undecided voter looked like in this election. And it's probably somebody who is raising a couple of kids, is maybe working 2 jobs to get by. They are not following the news the way we are. I say this all the time, but anybody who has a Twitter account, or if you've migrated over to Blue Sky, which is the sort of, alternative now that the left is rallying around. I have a Blue Sky account. I like it a lot. If you have one of those, you're probably not an undecided voter, and you're certainly not the median voter. And so I think that they're struggling to get by, and they're lucky if they have time to watch Monday Night Football, honestly, or disassociate for a few hours by watching, a few YouTube videos that they like. And so I think we just have to be mindful of, we can do the best possible job that we can communicating any number of wins, but so many of it's going to be over people's head. And that's why the messaging has to be simple, repetitive, and bash people over the head at it. And I'll give Bill Clinton a lot of credit, and I'll give James Carville a lot of credit. They were really good. The "It's the economy, stupid" is still the best piece of political advice I've heard in my entire life. And it's right. And I think that if we had remembered that lesson in this election, maybe we could have turned it around. I don't know. I would argue we had some very serious headwinds against us, and that complicates everything. And I would argue, I actually think that Kamala Harris saved us from a worse election fate. I think based on the fundamentals, we probably should have faced a 1984 or a 2008 style wipeout versus the Republicans. But they ran, I think, a pretty bad campaign with a pretty bad candidate. And so we were able to salvage it into a place where we're in a stronger position than we should be. But going back to Bill Clinton for a second, there's an Obama era evolution here of, not touting our successes too much, not being super political. And I think that the Democratic Party has to regain some of the toughness or meanness or savviness, however you want to describe it, that Bill Clinton did have in the 90s. I think we've gotten away from some of that. And there's a moment in this campaign where Barack Obama was giving a speech, and he said something along the lines of, Joe Biden sent you checks, but you didn't see his name printed out in big letters like Donald Trump did. And he was bragging about that. And the minute I saw that, I was like, no, his Joe Biden's name should have been huge on it. We should have called him Biden bucks, and we should have bashed people over the head with that stuff. And so Democrats need to take swift and immediate action to help people, and then we need to never shut up about it.
That's right.
No one should ever question what the Democratic Party's done for you lately. And then same goes for infrastructure projects. We passed the largest infrastructure package in the history of the country, right? And there's going to be all these projects, but they're going to take 5, 10, 15 years to get done. What the heck? People are expecting us to help them now because their lives are at risk right now. They're struggling to survive every day. And we didn't put enough urgency behind that. And that's part of the reason that we lost. Now, that said, Donald Trump's not going to do anything to help people, and I think buyer's remorse will set in here pretty quickly, just like it did last time. And he's already off doing absolutely wild things, like trying to install Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. So it's
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about that. We got to take a quick break. Mike Nellis is the founder and CEO of Authentic, a Chicago-based political advice and fundraising firm. We'll be right back after this.
Attention, everyone. Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Mike Nellis, who, by the way, is in it for the long haul. Mike is going to be around. Aren't you also doing Patty's show tonight, Mike?
Yes.
Oh, I thought so. With Ken Mejia Beal?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, well, we'll pace ourselves, so I won't try to exhaust you during this hour.
Well, I was told we're taking some calls, so we'll have plenty of time.
Okay. You talked about how Obama was bragging about how Biden didn't sign the checks that went out to people, and I agree with you. I actually have proof that was a mistake. My daughter-in-law teaches at a largely African-American middle school, and she teaches social studies, and she asked her kids in one class, if they knew like who their family was going to vote for. And she said a lot of the kids said that their parents were going to vote for Trump because he gave them money last time he was in office.
Yeah, I believe that. I fully believe that. People remember stuff like that, and we just didn't do enough to provide direct and immediate relief to people. Look, inflation is not the Democratic Party's fault. There's a global inflationary problem that's been happening for the last several years, which is actually related to COVID. And we can get into some of that if you want. But to me, we spent so much time telling people how good the economy was in a way that I think was really unhelpful. And the number of times I've heard, from some Democratic leader or some pundit on TV, 49 out of 50 Nobel laureate economists are saying that our economy is the envy of the world. And I'm like, well, if people aren't feeling that, it doesn't matter. And so, the tagline that I heard during the commercials was, WCPT, where facts matter, right? And facts do matter, and data and statistics do matter. I don't want to say that they don't, but what really matters to people is what they're feeling and experiencing in their day-to-day lives. So, if we have a bunch of economic data that suggests the fundamentals of the economy are strong, to paraphrase John McCain from 2008, but people aren't feeling it, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. If their paychecks aren't growing, and if their dollar is being stretched, and if they're struggling to buy a house and retire with dignity, they're not going to vote for us. And particularly for young people, if you're, 18 to 22 right now, and this is your first presidential election, and your frame of reference for leadership on the economic level is this administration. And again, I think Joe Biden was a good president. I think he navigated the economic headwinds that we faced very, very well. It just didn't translate to people, and then we didn't do enough job providing that relief. You're going, God, I just graduated. How do I get a job? How do I start a family? How do I buy a house? How do I retire with dignity? And I think that was playing out across multiple demographics. And if you look at the data that we've had over the last year and a half, people were screaming at us. And we found, we tried to make this election about other issues.
Wasn't that the point of things like when Kamala said she was going to put a program in place to give a $25,000 credit to first-time home buyers to get more young people in the market? I mean, it seemed like she understood and was trying to offer things that would appeal to those in difficulty, but it just, I don't know. Do you think it just didn't, resonate? Didn't have time to sink in?
I think people didn't trust us. I really think it's as simple as that. I think it's, if you're going to help me after this election, why aren't you helping me now? Why haven't you helped me over the last couple of years? And again, I think there's the reality of what the administration was doing and trying to do to help people, and then there's the way that people felt, and it's hard to build that trust. I mean, I think Kamala Harris was put in a really difficult position in this election. She took over the ticket with 103 days left until the election. She built what I think was an amazing campaign, not perfect, but amazing, and I think saved us from a worse fate. But it's because Donald Trump didn't really articulate an economic vision for the country. If you polled and talked to people, they couldn't tell you what he was going to do to help people. They might be able to tell you about the tariffs, but the impact of the tariffs are going to increase inflation, and people don't know that. But I think it really, if you just try to boil it down to the political science aspect of it, if I can use my political science degree for the first time in 20 years, it really is as simple as the party in power was punished for a bad economy. It's really as simple as it is. And I don't think that there's any economic policy that Kamala Harris could have come out with that would have changed the tide on that.
Yeah, I think so. Is this 2020 hindsight as you look back on this loss? Because in the weeks and days leading up to this election, honest to God, Mike, I mean, not that my track record is 100%, but I really thought we were going to do this. I really thought that we had done everything right, and where this silent majority of people voting for Trump came from, it blew me away. I mean, it blew me away. Did you feel in the final days and weeks that she had pulled this out, that we were headed to the White House, or did you have concerns even then?
Yeah, I thought she was going to win this election. I thought it would be close, and I was pretty consistent over the course of that 100 days saying that I thought it was going to be a close election. And, you know, the Harris campaign was always talking about being the underdog, and I thought that perspective was right. But I thought in those closing weeks they had done a good job of articulating their vision, and that Trump had made enough mistakes that, you know, she was going to pull it out. And my assumption would be that she'd probably win with similar margins to what we saw from Joe Biden 4 years ago. But a good chunk of people stayed home. But let's keep in mind, like, there's a ton of variance, and you can only make the best analysis that you can with the information that you have. And I think it was reasonable to see that, you know, Kamala Harris was in a position to win, and it just didn't happen the way that we wanted to. And that's too bad. But this race was really only decided by 235,000 votes in 3 swing states. In fact, we were super close to what I think would have been a hilarious scenario where Kamala Harris would have won the Electoral College and Donald Trump would have won the popular vote. And I say hilarious only because of, like, that's happened to us twice in my lifetime. And honestly, had Kamala won the Electoral College and a majority of Americans voted for Trump, I still think Trump should have been president then, because I don't believe in the Electoral College, and I think it's a terrible system to decide the presidency.
I agree with you, but if we're going to give Republicans the presidency when they win the Electoral College, I think we have to take it when we win the Electoral College, too.
100%. What I didn't see coming, I didn't see the swings as big as they were outside of the battleground states. And some of that is that, you know, I spent so much time, and I was working on a lot of, like, battleground races, and I was doing a lot of, like, house races. Like, you know, my firm does work for Angie Craig in Minnesota, and Pat Ryan in New York, and a whole bunch of others, Lauren Underwood here in the Chicagoland area. And so I was looking at the polling, and what I was seeing was this race looks an awful lot like 2020 to me. And I think if you look in the battleground states, it does look like 2020 with just Kamala Harris falling a little bit short. What I didn't see, because I wasn't looking at, like, statewide New York data or statewide Illinois data or stuff like that, was how poor we were doing statewide in other states. And so when you see, like, an 8 to 10 point swing in New York, that's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. And so what I just didn't see was people being that mad at us about the economy. And I knew people were mad about the economy. I think they have every right to be. And I thought that, you know, the Republicans were running a poor enough candidate and a poor enough campaign that we could overcome that and then start to fix that stuff. But it just wasn't in the cards. And the truth is, I think had Joe Biden stayed on the ticket, or if Republicans had nominated a more competent, reasonable Republican candidate, like if they had nominated Nikki Haley, I'm pretty sure that she would have won like 40 states, and that we might be down to, we might only have 40 Democratic senators, and that's even more terrifying than the situation we're in right now.
Yeah. Mike, we need to take a break. I'm talking to Mike Nellis. He's the founder and chief executive of Authentic, a political advising and fundraising firm in Chicago. We're going to be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Mike Nellis, who you are going to have the pleasure of listening to until 7 o'clock tonight, because he and Ken Mejia Beal are filling in for Patty Vasquez tonight. Mike, in the last week, I had an interview with a woman who writes a newsletter. I read what Tom Nichols was writing in The Atlantic, and they both had opposite visions for what the Democratic Party needs to do. I talked to Marissa Kabas, who writes a newsletter called The Handbasket, and her take was that that part of the reason why we hurt ourselves was not fully and completely embracing our progressive side, that we damaged, the Democratic Party damaged itself by trying to move too much to the center. Tom Nichols' argument in The Atlantic is almost the polar opposite of that. He says that going forward, the Democratic Party has to basically not try to cater to every group that has a position on a certain issue and wants the Democratic Party platform on that issue to be whatever it is they want. He said that the people behind the Democratic Party need to step back and they need to be pragmatic and they need to look at what do we need to do to win. And if that means that we cannot embrace a certain proposal from a certain political group that considers themselves Democrats, that position has to not be embraced. I don't know if I'm saying this clearly. If you think you understand, weigh in on this.
Yeah, I understand.
If you follow my convoluted words here.
Yeah, my least favorite type of post-election commentary is we lost /won because of this thing that I'm always talking about, and had we just done this other thing that I'm always advocating for, we would have won and everything would be great. And there's so many people out there that are like, if you're, and I'm not a movement progressive. I'm much more of a pretty pragmatic moderate. Although I worked for Bernie Sanders in 2016, so I don't think anybody can question my progressive credentials. But I get super frustrated when like the same group of people on the left are like, well, if they had just embraced these like very far left proposals on economics, if they had just done exactly what Bernie Sanders did in 2016, we would have won. And then you'll find the sort of like triangulation folks that'll do the same and be like, well, if we had just moderated and been more like Republicans, we would have won. And I don't really think that's right. Like in a lot of situations, it's usually a yes and where there's sort of bits and pieces of things you can take, and everybody's got their perspective, and I'll give mine, but I tend to take it as like we're 3 weeks out from a loss. We don't have even a fraction of the information, the data that we're going to have in the coming months to figure out why we lost and what we need to do. And we don't know the terms of which the next election will be set because we just don't know what the next couple of weeks and months and years looks like with Trump. And that's one of the challenges with Trump, is always trying to figure out where the rhetoric stops and the action begins and what he actually is trying to do and think about. So, but if I had to put a marker on where I think the Democratic Party should go from here, I would basically put it in 3 different buckets. The first bucket would be the economy. The second one would be culture. And the third one would be campaigns and the actual work that we're doing to win. On the economy, I tend to believe that embracing simple, populist, and direct economic policies will make the Democratic Party stronger. And what I'd like to see us get away from is these, 12-point plans that are going to do X, Y, and Z, that are complicated, that are tax breaks, that don't provide direct and immediate relief, that are difficult to explain, that usually have goofy Washington, D.C. sounding names, and just go with very basic stuff. And something I liked about Bernie's presidential campaign, for example, was Bernie would say, we're gonna do college for all. We're gonna do healthcare for all. Everybody's gonna get access to this, and it was broad and it was direct. And then you compare that to kind of like where the party landed, which is we landed in a place where we talked a lot about student loan debt relief, which I think is a good idea, and I support it. But it creates an inherent have and a have not, which is a bit of a problem. And then it can be convoluted to explain, like, oh, we're forgiving these people's debt, but we're not forgiving this person's debt. And I was promised this, but I didn't get this. And that's a problem. And instead of creating policies that are like, probably like a set of things, but the front line is we're getting everybody health care. We're going to get everybody into college. We're going to give everybody a good job and opportunity, and just sort of broadening that out in a more populist way. And then on the culture front, and this is where I'll probably be the most controversial. Like, I do think the Democratic Party has lost the culture war. I think we are frustrating a lot of people with not even so much the things that we say, but the way that we say them. And I think if we're perceived by a large part of the population as lecturing people about what they should or shouldn't believe, what they should or shouldn't say, what they should or shouldn't enjoy, that's going to be a problem. And I think that is something that drags us down. And I think it particularly drags us down in red states and red districts, where we could go in there and have real conversations about the economy and public infrastructure and things that'll make a direct and immediate impact on people's lives, but they don't like or trust us. And to be clear, when I'm talking about culture, I'm not sitting here suggesting that we abandon trans kids or anything like that. I'm really tired of listening to politicians and pundits say that the reason we lost this election is because of the transgender community, because it's not. I think we need to do a better job of figuring out how we talk about these issues. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we get to decide what we talk about and how we talk about it. We don't have to let the media or our opponents define how we talk about this stuff. But we need to be smarter about how we approach it, because I've seen a lot of compelling evidence that and for those who haven't seen it, I have to imagine everybody saw it, but that final closing Trump ad, which talked about Kamala Harris, it played a clip of Kamala Harris talking about transition surgery for transgender or for inmates, for prison inmates, and then ended with an incredible tagline, which was that Kamala Harris is for they, them, not you. I'll tell you, it's one of the greatest political ads of all time. And it is uncomfortable as it makes me and as disgusting as it is. It's like the Willie Horton ad. It's disgusting, but like it's incredibly effective, and a political professional can tell you why. We lost votes because of that. I believe that. I don't think it's why we lost the election, but we lost votes because of it. And
Mike, I have an observation, and
Sure.
I'd like you as the political expert to weigh in on this. I was talking about this with my partner, Ray, and I said, when she gave that interview, it kind of surprised me. I mean, obviously at the time, she didn't realize that she would be running for president. She didn't realize this was going to be a clip that was going to come back to haunt her. But you talk about, I think you make an important point about the way we talk about things. She could have looked at that interviewer and said, you know what? I believe in health care. I believe that if people need health care, if people need medical treatment, that should be available to everybody. She didn't have to get into the whole trans thing. It should have just been about, I believe every human being in the United States of America has a right to health care and has a right to be cared for. I mean, she could have answered that without being so trans specific, and she would have been just as supportive of the idea, and she would not have created I think politicians nowadays have to know that anything they say down the road can be used against them.
Yep.
And I think that they have to be smarter. There was I think, a loving, kind, embracing way to answer that question that would not have come around to bite her in the butt.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about how we can do a better job of advocating for the trans community, right? Because I think what you just said was really, really smart, which is pivoting these issues to be like, I believe everybody should have access to the health care that they need to make the choices that they need, which is a very broad statement, but supportive, and is not going to diminish anybody. And when we're talking about organizing for the trans community, one of the biggest issues that I hear from trans activists that I meet is about housing discrimination. And I think everyone in this country can relate to that. And Republicans are gonna make a false assumption based on winning this election 3 weeks ago that they can just keep bashing the trans community. But actually, they have a very poor record of when they bash the trans community. Republicans have tried to do like this weird bathroom stuff, and largely the voting population has rejected stuff like that and been like, that's ridiculous. Why are you talking about that? So Nancy Mace this week trying to prevent Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride from being able to use the congressional bathrooms because she's transgender is wrong. Is going to cost them votes and is the wrong side of the culture war. Where they can get us, though, is when we start talking about things that the people don't understand and can't relate to on some level. And to a certain degree, like the conversation about transgender athletes playing sports is confusing to people, and they don't understand it, and it scares them, and that kind of gets away from us a little bit. I think the inmate stuff sort of got away from us a little bit, and we need clearer answers to those things and how we talk about them. But it should always be a pivot back to, here's how I'm going to help the most of us. Mm-hmm. And that includes the transgender community, because we're building a coalition that has the biggest tent, right? Like, we built a coalition that had a tent from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney, which got to be the biggest tent in the history of American politics. Just wasn't big enough, unfortunately. But we just got to do a better job talking about this stuff. But I want to make it super clear. We should not stop fighting for the people that we love, and we should not stop fighting to make sure that people have the rights to like live a life with dignity and get a good paying job and have health care access. Because like I'm very frustrated with like every member of my party, and there haven't been that many of them, but they've gotten outsized reporting that wants to, throw the baby out with the bathwater here. And I just think that that's wrong. And then the third bucket of things, just to add one final point on this, we need to do a better job of how we run our campaigns. We need to do a better job of how we build strong Democratic parties throughout this country, and we need to do a better job of how we synthesize and analyze data. And just to give you one, I could spend hours talking about this, but on the campaign front, the Harris campaign had, and this is just based on the public reporting that's been out there, the Harris campaign had evidence that they believed told them that transgender ad that we were just talking about wasn't making an impact in the election. And I don't know what data that was, but let me assume it was probably some modeling that they had and some polling data that they had. And meanwhile, door knockers in battleground states all across the country were reporting back to headquarters, people are asking us about this ad, and I don't have an answer for them. And so we need sort of like a qualitative.
Why was there that disconnect between what people were learning? I mean, shouldn't that be something that the national campaign goes out of their way to find out? Hey, you've got 1,000 people this weekend door knocking. They all get debriefed afterwards. What are the big issues? What are the concerns? I mean, isn't that kind of politics 101?
Yeah, I think it's some sort of breakdown in the communication. And keep in mind, it's a campaign that only existed for 100 days. Like, typically you get a lot more time to build a presidential campaign, but we have to do a better job of listening at every level of the organization and gathering as much data as we can. And we can't, polling is fundamentally broken. I don't care what anybody says. Polling is still just a snapshot in time. And so we need to listen to we're having conversations. They knocked on more doors in the history of America over the final weekend. We should be doing what we can to make sure that the people who are knocking on doors have the answers that they need that are effective to help them push through some of this right-wing stuff, because they defined Kamala Harris as being weird, which is absurd to me because the Trump-Vance ticket was super weird, and supported all kinds of crazy stuff. And again, I think the race came down to the economy, and I want to make that super clear. But we do have a tendency on culture to turn off a certain segment of the population. If we can do a better job of communicating on those issues and do a better job of figuring out how we talk to people with a shared language without being seen as lecturing them or nagging them. I sometimes joke, sometimes the Democratic Party makes me feel like they're my dad yelling at me for wearing a backwards baseball cap. And I get a little bit tired of it too. And I'm a proud member of the Democratic Party. So how must a regular person who isn't maybe moving at the pace of progress that I want them to, or that I am, feeling about that? And I just have to imagine it's part of where we're losing people.
We need to take another break. I'm talking to the founder and CEO of Authentic, a Chicago-based political advising and fundraising firm. And, Mike, you should not wear your baseball cap backwards. My preference, Mike, would be for you not to wear a baseball cap at all. Okay?
Well, I'm sorry for wearing my baseball cap to this interview then. My bad. Does it help that it's a camo ad?
No. There's nothing worse than baseball caps. Oh. No one should wear them. They should be banned. They should be illegal. But that's a discussion for another time.
You just lost every Cubs fan and the remaining White Sox fans after last season.
Okay, that would be the exception. If you're going to the ballpark, that's a baseball cap. If you're wearing it to a baseball game, that's appropriate. Nowhere else in the world. Mike Nellis now. I'll be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm speaking to Mike Nellis, the CEO and founder of Authentic. He was also a senior aide to Kamala Harris. He is going to be sticking around. I personally am going to be hanging up my spurs in about 10 minutes. Mike, God love him, baseball cap or no, is going to stick it out until 7 p.m. tonight with Ken Mejia Beal. Patty is off tonight. And just as a reminder, because I'm sure you want to put this down on your calendar, I'm off all next week. I'm going to go somewhere fun with my daughter, and then I'm going to eat too much on Thanksgiving, and I will probably eat too much the next day as well. Then I will sleep all day. Anyway, it's going to be a good week.
That sounds awesome. I'm super jealous.
Doesn't it? Eating and sleeping, yeah. Mm-hmm. Those are two of my favorite things in the whole world. So, Mike, I know that you and Ken are going to be taking some calls today when you fill in for Patty. Are you going to be having any guests?
I'm honestly not sure, to be honest with you.
Well,
my guess would be yes.
I actually have an answer to that. Apparently, Mary Jo Mullen is going to join you, who's the owner of the Sweet Spot Bakery and also happens to be candidate for the mayor of Lisle. So kind of a foodie Thanksgiving political thing all wrapped up in one.
I love that. We also have a couple other guests. We have Jinsu Daniel Hugh, who is the caucus chair for the Victory Fund of the Midwest. We have Nicole Johnson, who is a local journalist, will be on. And then Leeson Hillenberg-Buell, and I apologize if I mispronounced anyone's name, but they are the development manager for Youth Outlook.
Okay, well, I only know about the one guest. If you say there are more, I will take your word for it.
Well, the fantastic Lady B just handed me sheets of paper so that I could say it. So.
Okay, well, if it came from Lady B, we know it's
That's
right.
I'm ride or die, Lady B. Right now,
yeah,
so.
And that's a smart way to be, baby, because she can save your bacon.
Yep.
And I'm glad she's going to be around to help you guys out. So, what are your plans for Thanksgiving?
So we were supposed to head home. My family lives in Nebraska, so we were going to go home to visit my folks and my wife's folks. But my wife is having a minor outpatient procedure on Friday, and we couldn't figure out the logistics. So tomorrow we're going to have a Friendsgiving with a bunch of my friends, and they're going to come over and watch football. And we're going to just everybody's bringing their favorite appetizer. So we're just going to eat appetizer for dinner, and we're going to make a big charcuterie board. And then on Thursday, my wife, I, and our son will probably I think we're going to make like pasta, probably homemade pasta from scratch.
Well, that's nice. I'm glad that you're going to be around to take care of her. You say the Friendsgiving is tomorrow?
Friendsgiving's tomorrow, yep.
So that means you're watching college football, 100%. Right?
Yep. I'll be watching Notre Dame play Army because I'm a graduate of the University of Notre Dame.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know,
You can't see I'm literally wearing a Notre Dame baseball cap right now that you disapprove of.
Oh, dear God, did you have to go there? Really? I'm just getting ready to feel good and leave on vacation, and you just kind of stick it. You just gotta kind of needle it right there.
Well, you're handing the airwaves over to a degenerate wearing a baseball cap. I'm going to wear it backwards for the whole hour with Ken.
That makes me sad. I don't understand where that tradition started, but I actually once moved out of an apartment building because every time I got in the elevator, there were men with backwards baseball caps, and I thought, this is not where I want to live. I do not want to ride the elevator with these people. I do not want to know them. I do not want to speak to them. And I moved away. This is how strongly I feel about the whole, okay, maybe there were a few other factors, but the baseball cap thing was part of it too.
Well, I assure you, us backwards baseball cap wearing dudes are okay. We're not so bad once you get to know us.
No, I think, sweetheart, I think you need to do some soul searching here.
I mean, I'm one of the founders of White Dudes for Harris. I think I'm way down the rabbit hole at this point. I'm officially a dude bro in every sense of the word. So.
Yeah. So is it too soon? Do you think, because Gavin Newsom's already making noises about running in the next election, he's not being overt, but J.B. Pritzker sure looks like he is kind of being very careful about what he says and does. When do you think we're going to see the first person officially declare?
Do you know that when you're doing the dishes and you stick like a fork in the dispenser and it makes that loud, horrible noise?
Mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
That's the noise I heard when you started asking me about 2028 presidential candidates. I have no idea who's going to run. Obviously, Gavin's Gavin's basically ready to announce tomorrow, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing about it is I'm not going to say which candidates I like or don't like, but I think something that gets undercovered here is that Democrats have a really great bench of talent, whether it be from the Senate or the House or our governors or some of the other players in the space. We're going to have a very vibrant field that will, I think, be pretty fired up, ready to try to win this next election and move the country forward. And the Republicans, in my opinion, don't have as good of a base. I think that a good of a bench. I think Trump has kind of squeezed all the oxygen out of the room so that he's the only one who can exist. And I was not super impressed with J.D. Vance in the last election as the VP candidate. I don't think he was terrible, but I don't think he was great. So it'll be interesting to me to see who runs on the Republican side. But it'll be interesting because 2 years from now, everybody's going to be launching their campaign, and we're going to have 2 open primaries again, which I think the last time we had that was 2016.
An open primary already exhausts me, that idea.
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I just think we don't know at this point who is going to emerge as the perfect candidate. One thing that I will say is I hope it's a man, and as a woman, it makes me sad to say that because I just don't think this country is ready to pull the trigger on a woman. They've told us that twice, and the next election is too important to mess around.
I disagree with you. Like, I think that, look, racism and sexism are very real things, so I don't want to diminish the fact that they're real. But I don't think we lost either of the last two times against Trump because our candidate was a woman. And I think... I'm not saying that
I would love to believe that, and I know that it's kind of one of those things that's tricky to try to show up in the data.
Yeah.
But I really think that if we had a white male, I think things might have been different. I think it was a bridge too far, especially for some more traditional male voters.
I tend to believe that anybody who wouldn't have voted for Kamala Harris for that reason was probably not going to vote Democratic anyway. And I think the economic headwinds were really strong. And I also think the reverse of that is that there are a lot of constituencies that Kamala Harris fired up dramatically, whether it be online fundraising or turnout front. And so I just, to me, it's all about trade-offs, right, with stuff like that. But I would have no reservations nominating a woman 4 years from now for president. I wouldn't, because I just don't think that's the core of the reason that we lost. Again, not saying that it's not present. I'm not saying
that it was the sole reason, but I think when you feel you've got a handle on the post-election data, I'd really like you to walk me through it. Let's do that, okay?
I'd be happy to.